Welcome back to the Integration Code. I'm your host, Kaylin Rakowski, and thank you so much for tuning in today. So, today I want to speak to something that I feel is one of the most profound and least spoken about truths on the healing path. And it's this: you don't just revisit your wounds, you revisit your gifts. And I'm going to say that again because I really want this to land in the system beyond the words. Healing isn't just about revisiting your wounds, it is about rediscovering and revisiting your gifts. There's so much language in the healing world around the sense of it being a spiral, around cycles, around revisiting, around coming back into the same patterns, the same relationships, the same edges, the same fears, the same grief, right? This essentially like the same contraction and the same wounds from a different level of awareness. We've all probably heard this, right? And yes, it's true. Healing isn't linear. Healing often moves in circles that are not actually circles, right? They're more like a spiral. And each time we return, it's asking something different of you. And what I don't often hear spoken about enough is that when you revisit the site of your wound, you're not just revisiting your pain. You're revisiting the part of you, of yourself, essentially, right, that had to go underground in order to survive. And this really changes everything, right? Because now healing is not about fixing what's wrong, it's about reclaiming what's true. It's about realizing that trauma did not only leave behind, dysregulation, fear, grief, or fragmentation, but it also interrupted expression. It interrupted innocence, creativity. It interrupted access to your own gifts, to your own direct line to your aliveness. And so if you're someone who, has felt really discouraged because you keep finding yourself back in familiar terrain, back in familiar feelings, back in familiar inner landscapes, I want to offer you something different today, another perspective. Maybe you're not back there because you're failing. Maybe you're back there because there is more of you there. A piece of your voice. Maybe there's a piece of your freedom, a piece of your power. Maybe there's a piece of your art, your leadership, your genius, your softness, your truth, right? This essence, your original self that's just waiting there. And the spiral isn't just taking you backward. I like to think that it's also bringing us home. That is what I want to open today with. Not, healing as a punishment or healing as this endless maintenance, but healing as a lifetime of returning, of coming home to self, of remembrance. Healing really is a sacred return. It's what I've come to know from my 13, 14 years in this space. Healing is the recovery of the self that existed before the fracture happened. Before that fracture, that wound, that pain, that experience taught you to leave parts of yourself behind. And take a breath and really feel that. Because this isn't a small reframe. What we're talking about is a complete paradigm shift and a way that you see and show up and relate to the world. So where do we even go with this? I think, first it's to acknowledge that the healing spiral is real, but the way that we have understood it is incomplete. When people say healing is a spiral, what they usually are referring to is this. You heal something, essentially you think you're done, you come back, Same wound, same trigger, same insecurity, same pattern, same fear, same relationship, right? Same body sensation, same edge, so on and so forth, right? I'm sure you all can insert something in your life that you feel like you keep revisiting, that keeps reoccurring. And a lot of people interpret this return as a regression, as a failure. In my work with clients, I hear, why am I here again? I thought we've already worked on this. I thought I had already moved on from this. I really thought that we were past talking about this, right? And the truth is, the return to it isn't really the problem. There isn't a problem in returning to these patterns, these experiences, so on and so forth. So the return is almost like the way I'm seeing it, like the architecture of healing. And because the first time you meet a wound, more times than not, we're meeting it from the level of consciousness that you had at that time, right? So, to kind of further elaborate, this would look like, the capacity that you had, the regulation that you had, maybe the support in your life, the willingness, and really the level of safety in your body that you had. And then life continues, right? You grow, you expand, you develop more capacity, you become more embodied, more honest, more truthful, more resourced, or, even just more self aware. And the same terrain opens again, but it is not the same meeting point, right? You are not the same person meeting it, and that matters, and that part isn't always talked about. This is why healing can feel repetitive while also being profoundly evolutionary, freeing, liberating. Because the pattern may look similar on the surface, but really energetically, right? The consciousness meeting it is not the same. And I think where the conversation has stayed too shallow is that we often stop here, right? We say, yes, you revisit the same wound from a different level of awareness, but we don't often say is that you also revisit the self that existed around the wound, right? The self, the part of you that had to adapt, the self that felt like they had to shut down, the self that had to become hypervigilant, the self that had to become pleasing, the self that learned to stay small, the self that became agreeable, quiet, disconnected, who believed they had to always be productive, right? The self that had to become whatever, right? Insert blank here, whatever your environment demanded in order for you to stay attached, to stay safe, to stay included, to stay loved, or honestly, just to simply survive. And beneath that adaptation was something original, right? Something living, something true, something that didn't disappear, but it's been buried. So when you revisit a wound, yes, you are being asked to process pain, but you are also standing at the doorway of the original self that the pain interrupted. That is the deeper spiral. That's the sacredness in the spiral. That is the spiral of remembrance. Okay? And I think too, we often associate, our traumas or these fractures are responsible for our pain, right? But truthfully, like the fracture doesn't create the pain. What it really does at its core is it interrupts expression. That is the part I really want to slow down and honor. And this is really my personal philosophy and the work that I do. Like it's all around this. That when fracture happens, when trauma happens, when there's a rupture, abandonment, shaming, overwhelm, neglect, betrayal, maybe a sense of powerless, or even just being in environments that cannot hold the truth of who you are, something really specific occurs here. Yes, of course, right? Our pain gets stored, our fear gets stored in the body, right? Our system adapts, like all that is true. But what also happens is this, how do I put it? It's that your authentic expression really becomes interrupted, right? Your truth, your radiance, your soul. And that interruption can look like so many things. It can start showing up as not speaking up. Maybe you completely became disconnected from your body. It can look like muting your joy. It can look like suppressing your creativity, your pleasure. I see this one a lot where, as grown-ups, we forgot how to play. It can look like you're afraid to be seen, that you can't trust yourself or your intuition, not ever knowing even what you want or desire because you're so disconnected from yourself, right? I think too, it can almost show up as abandoning your sensitivity. And I think this one's coming forward because for me, this has been my biggest wound, right? And the biggest way I disconnected was abandoning my sensitivity because I felt like it was too dangerous to stay connected to, right? I've heard my whole entire life, you're too sensitive. And that sensitivity is literally my superpower. It can look like in your life where you turn down your gifts because your environment didn't make room for them or even maybe demonized them. And, the point I'm getting to is this is why healing is not just about emotional cleanup. It's not just nervous system repair. It's not just reducing symptoms, essentially, right? It's not just learning regulation. And, caveat, those things matter deeply, right? Of course they do. But if we stop there, we're missing something holy. Because healing is also the recovery of this interrupted expression. And many people do not realize that they call confusion, or what they call confusion, right, is sometimes just buried truth. What they call numbness is sometimes just buried desire that never got an opportunity to be witnessed, to be felt, or have action taken on. A lot of things that people call lack of purpose is really just this disconnection from your essence, from your authenticity. What if your aliveness was not erased but protected underneath grief, fear, survival responses until the moment your system could safely return? And this changes the tone of healing entirely, right? Because now you're not digging through, rubble, essentially like looking for scraps. You're participating in a sacred unveiling. You're becoming safe enough to meet what's been waiting. And I feel like this part is important to say too. The return of your gifts may not look like a return to the exact personality you had before the pain. And it's not supposed to, right? Think about again like this spiral, because now you'll be wiser, more discerning, more embodied, more mature, more grounded. But it will still carry that original frequency of you, the thing that has always been yours, the thing that existed before the fracture taught you how to shapeshift, the thing that cannot be manufactured or created because it's intrinsically you. And this is why healing is so intimate. Because what you are recovering is not just generic wellness, it is your original design, your blueprint, your energetic signature. It's the truth of your being before defense became identity. I want to go even a layer deeper here. And if you're still here with me on this conversation, you're here for this, right? And this isn't poetic, it's deeply embodied, okay? The nervous system has everything to do with what becomes available to us. When the body does not feel safe, expression narrows, perception narrows, choice narrows, creativity narrows, relational capacity narrows, the sense of the future narrows. The world becomes filtered through the lens of survival. And this is not a personal failure. This is an intelligent adaptation. A system in survival is not asking you, how do I become my most fully expressed self? It's asking, how do I get through this, right? How do I minimize harm? How do I avoid rejection? How do I stay attached? How do I not fall apart? How do I keep myself together? How do I get to tomorrow? Right? It's like this seeking to just get the bare minimum. And so when regulation begins to happen, when safety begins to build in the body, when your body starts learning that presence is possible, a whole different set of capacities essentially emerge, right? People become more imaginative, spontaneous, curious. They can have more pleasure, curiosity, the ability to tell more truth, to feel more sensation, access more intuition, right? It's like every sense of capacity expands. Right? There's more choice, more references available. And this is why the body matters so much in this work. Because authentic expression does not come online through mindset alone. It comes online when the body no longer perceives life through the lens of constant threat. Right? When we're not bracing for impact. And that means your healing is not just helping you to feel less anxious or less reactive or less shut down. It is literally expanding what is possible for you to express. This is why embodiment matters. This is why nervous system work matters. This is why integration matters. Because the goal is not just to temporarily touch insight, right? The goal is that your body becomes safe enough, right? A safe enough home, a refuge, a sanctuary, essentially, for your truth to live within it, right? And this looks like safe enough to be in your power, safe enough for you to access your gifts, safe enough for you to use your voice, right? Safe enough for you to feel your full humanity. When your body becomes safer, authenticity becomes more available. And that means the return to self is not just conceptual, it's physiological, it's relational, it's somatic, it's spiritual, right? And I think, I also want to speak to, why we keep returning to the same places. This is the place where many people get hard on themselves. They say, why am I here again? Why am I triggered again? Why am I grieving this? Why am I, still working on this? So on and so forth. Why does this keep showing up for me? That's another big one. And yes, sometimes patterns repeat because they have not yet fully been metabolized. But I think there's something deeper that deserves to be witnessed. Sometimes you keep returning to the same place because the self who had to leave there has not fully come home. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes you keep returning to the same place because the self who had to leave has not yet fully come home. Sometimes you keep returning because there is more life waiting there, more truth waiting there, more expression waiting there, more unclaimed, untapped power and potential waiting there. And the psyche in its wisdom brings you back not as punishment, but as an invitation, not to suffer endlessly, but to really retrieve and reclaim what could not be held the first time. This is a very different relationship with reoccurring themes and patterns. Now the repeated return essentially is not, proof that you're broken, but it's proof that your system is still devoted to wholeness, still devoted to completion, still devoted to bringing home what got left behind. And I think when we begin to approach our reoccurring wounds with this kind of reverence, it's almost like the judgment and the shame begin to dissolve. Because now when we're back into something familiar, you don't have to collapse into judgment. You can begin to explore it from a different lens. What part of me is here? What piece of my truth is here? What expression was interrupted here? What capacity is ready to come home through this? Right? And feel that these are radically different orientations around the same thing. And it's with so much more compassion, because it's assuming that it's intelligence. It assumes purpose, right? This assumes that your healing is not random. It assumes that your psyche, your body, your spirit are all working towards restoration. Let's talk about really the return of soul gifts. Let's talk actually just like directly about gifts for a moment, because I know this language can feel abstract unless we make it real, and I want to make sure this really lands today. What do I mean when I say things like healing brings you back to your gifts? The way I perceive it is that as the body becomes safer, as these defenses begin to soften, as adaptation loosens, as the nervous system gains more capacity, qualities, right, that were always yours to begin, your true self begins to reemerge. And maybe it's your voice. You start with saying what you really mean and want to say. You stop over explaining yourself. God, women do this all the time. You stop abandoning your truth to keep the peace. You stop shrinking around people who cannot meet your fullness, right? Maybe it's creativity. You feel pulled to write again, to speak, to sing, to paint, to build, to create, right? To share like the Shakti that's inside of you. Maybe it's your intuition. You start knowing things without needing 100 layers of external validation. You start learning to listen and trust your body. You start hearing the quiet voice beneath the fear. You start feeling when something is aligned and when it's not. Maybe it looks like leadership. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop waiting to be chosen. You stop dimming yourself for comfort. You stop performing humility when it's actually, what's actually needed is truth. Maybe it looks like softness. You stop armoring so heavy. You let yourself receive. You let yourself be touched by beauty, by love. You let joy in. You let tenderness exist without calling it weakness. Maybe it looks like discernment for you. You realize healing didn't make you more passive, it made you more clear. You no longer call self-abandonment compassion. You no longer call over-tolerance love. You no longer confuse endurance with devotion. Or maybe it's your spiritual sensitivity. You feel life speaking to you again. You feel the sacred in the ordinary moments. You feel connected to something greater. You feel your own soul not as a concept, but really as a felt experience, right? These are not random side effects. These are signs of return. These are signs that your self-expression, your truth is no longer occupied by defense. These are signs that, life is trying to move back in. And I think this is one of the greatest hidden truths of healing. Your gifts are often buried beneath the very wound work that you're avoiding. Not because you need to be fixed before you're gifted, right? But because these adaptations that protected you also are blocking the doorway to your original expression. So as you heal, yes, you feel the pain, but you also uncover the gold, you uncover the gifts. You know, if healing was only framed as symptom reduction, eventually it can feel exhausting. But when the healing really becomes centered about reclamation, suddenly the journey has like this different tone and texture, right? Now you're not just reducing suffering, you are expanding life. You're not just trying to stabilize or ground yourself, you're awakening simultaneously. You're not just trying to feel okay, you're becoming more fully yourself. Now you're not just processing the past, you're recovering your future. That's paradigm shifting because it means healing is not this detour away from your gifts. Healing is a pathway back to them. And that means, like every moment of truth matters. Every boundary matters. Every honest conversation, every tear, every moment that you stay with yourself. Every time you choose to be embodied instead of dissociate. Every time you listen to your body. Every time you refuse to betray yourself. Right? Your knowing matters because each of these moments is not just healing pain. It's making you more available for your authentic expression, for your truth. And I think for many people, this is the missing source of motivation along this journey. Not just I want to stop suffering, but I want to know who I am when survival is no longer running the show. I want to know what my life feels like when my nervous system is not organizing around old danger. I want to know what becomes possible when my voice is no longer buried. I want to know what my gifts feel like inside a body that can hold them. This is a very different calling. This is not just healing, it's initiation. I want to open a deeper space here. If you are listening, I want you to pause and feel into these questions. And not from the mind, not from something that you need to articulate and answer perfectly, but more from a doorway. I want you to think about what part of me had to go quiet in order to belong. What part of me became too dangerous to express in the environments that shaped me? What qualities were natural to me before I learned how to leave myself or protect myself? What parts of me only appear when I feel safe? And maybe one more. What if the place that you keep avoiding is also the place where more of you is available? What have you been calling loss that simply may be waiting? And I want you to take your time with this because these aren't just journal prompts. These are remembrance questions, retrieval questions, doorways. And I want this to really land in the body. I want you to feel this. Maybe the reason you have felt this strong sense of fatigue with healing is because somewhere along the way it became too focused on your brokenness. Maybe you learned to look at yourself through the lens of what was wounded, what is reactive, what is traumatized, what is fragmented, what is dysregulated, what is unfinished. And while all of that may contain truth, it's not your whole truth. There is also something in you that has remained untouched. There is something in you that never stopped knowing. Something in you that never lost the frequency of truth. Something in you that remained intact beneath every adaptation. something in you that has been waiting, not for you to become better, but for you to become more available. Available enough to feel, available enough to listen, available enough to stop overriding, available enough to stop abandoning, available enough to stop reducing healing to symptom management alone, available enough to recognize that what is returning is not random. It is you, the deeper you, the truer you, the you that existed before adaptation, before fragmentation, before long rehearsals of self-abandonment. And I want to say this to you now. You are not too late. You are not too fractured. You are not too much work. You are not too buried. You are not too lost. And what is yours has not missed you. Your gifts have not become inaccessible because you survived. Your truth did not leave you because you adapted. Your soul did not disappear because your nervous system had to protect you. It has all been here, waiting for enough safety, for enough space, for enough support, for enough willingness, for enough honesty. And now maybe that moment is here. Maybe that's why you are being brought back. Not so you can suffer one more time, but so you can retrieve one more piece of yourself. And I really want you to let that land. You know, I want to make this as practical as I can to close this. I want you to begin to look at, how do you work with healing in a way that honors both the wound and the gift? And the first step is really to stop approaching these reoccurring pains and patterns with this frustration and judgment or shame, right? The next time something comes up, instead of saying, why am I here? Start asking, what part of me is present here? What truth is trying to come through? What is asking to be seen more deeply? And then listen for what becomes available as you regulate. Not just what becomes quieter, but what becomes louder. That part's important, right? What desires become louder? What boundaries become more obvious? What truths become undeniable? What dreams come back on? And I want you to begin honoring your gifts as part of your healing. Don't wait until you're fully healed to create again, right? Don't wait until you think you're fully healed to use your voice. Don't wait until you think you're fully healed to trust yourself, to trust your knowing. Don't wait to begin living from truth, because expression itself can be part of the restoration. Your voice can be part of the healing. Art can be healing. Truth, leadership, joy, pleasure. Become intimate with your body's language, because your body will often tell you when a gift is trying to come back online. There may be this heightened energy, emotion, sensation, longing, right? This charge around it. Don't always try to interrupt or interpret, right, your activation as danger. Sometimes activation is life force trying to move through a body that has been bracing for a long time. And last, I want to leave you with, healing is not just about what you are letting go of. It's about what you are becoming capable of holding, what you are coming home to. And that's the real work. So the next time you find yourself returning to something familiar, take a moment to pause, to see it as an invitation, to see it as a place to remember, to reclaim. Ask what gift has been folded into this wound, because the spiral is not only taking you back to pain, it's taking you back to yourself again and again and again. Not the self shaped by fear, not the self organized around survival, but the self beneath the fracture. The self beneath the long years of becoming what you had to become. There is something sacred about that return. There is something sacred about realizing that healing is not just reduction. It's revelation. It's remembering. It's in the slow and holy, beautiful process of becoming safe enough to embody what has always been true. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that you never revisit the wound, but every return carries you back home. So I want to thank you guys for being here with me. This was a longer one. If you're here, I would love to hear in the comments what resonated, what became activated. And thank you for walking this path with courage. Thank you for just being willing to see healing, not just as this place where pain gets processed, but where truth gets recovered. And if this episode spoke to something deep within you, sit with that. Journal with it. Bring it into the body. Let it be expressed. Let it become, something more than just what you understand, but something that you live. Because that essentially is the work. Not just awakening, but embodiment. Not just a sense of insight, but integration. And not just healing, but remembrance. And if you are walking your own path of inner work, remembrance, you can explore what it's like to work with me in my private, at-home, conscious containers where we use psychedelics as a pathway to healing. So check that out in the show notes or head over to the bio to apply. Until next time, stay well. Love ya.